Have you ever stopped to wonder what exactly hides in the shadows of the ultra-wealthy? We're talking about those incredibly elite locked-door circles where money literally flows like water, but the actual paperwork, well, that's locked away in impenetrable vaults. Today's explainer is going to pull right back on that curtain. We're diving into international asset disputes to reveal a tense, highly complex world where, honestly, nothing is quite as it seems. We have two fascinating case files to open today that really expose the hidden machinery of global wealth. Now, to really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of the secrets we're dealing with here, just consider this number: $1 billion. And no, that's not the total value of some massive investment portfolio. That staggering figure represents just the alleged hidden markup in a single, decade-long dispute between two men. It is a number that completely rocked the global financial and art markets to their absolute core.
So, welcome to the Dark Dossier: Art, Assets, and Swiss Shadows. Through these two interconnected case files, which, by the way, are derived straight from actual legal rulings and historical documents, we're going to trace the highly secretive mechanics of global finance, the fine art world, and high-stakes corporate boardrooms.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Case File 1, the Bouvier Affair. This story kicks off with a relationship spanning from 2003 all the way to 2014 between Russian billionaire Dmitry Rybolovlev and Swiss art dealer Yves Bouvier. We're talking about the acquisition of 38 world-class masterpieces. But to really grasp how these transactions actually worked, you have to understand exactly where they happened. Enter the Swiss Freeport. Functionally, these ultra-secure tax-free storage facilities are basically financial cloaking devices. High-stakes transactions of absolutely priceless art happen entirely within these walls, which effectively keeps the true nature of the exchanges deep in the shadows, totally outside of regular customs jurisdictions. Now, what's really interesting here is the actual mechanics. They relied heavily on complex, offshore paper trails. It goes like this. Step 1. Set up offshore entities, like, say, the Nebilo Trust based over in Liechtenstein. Step 2. Broker a highly private sale. Step 3. Transfer the asset to the final buyer. And inside this extremely opaque, multi-layered structure, the true acquisition costs were allegedly obscured. That is exactly what allowed massive, totally undisclosed profit margins to be quietly extracted. To see just how wildly lucrative this could be, let's walk through the timeline for Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi. So, at point 1, Bouvier negotiates purchasing the painting for $80 million. But simultaneously, at point 2, court papers indicate Rybolovlev's team was fed a completely different narrative, one that suggested a much higher cost. Point 3, the painting is finally sold to Rybolovlev for $127.5 million. I mean, that is a massive quiet flip, generating an absolutely enormous profit in just a single transaction. And you know, this exact mechanism is what ignited an absolute international legal firestorm. Let's look at both sides neutrally here. On one hand, Rybolovlev claimed Bouvier acted as a fiduciary agent, basically an advisor who systematically and secretly overcharged him, which resulted in that insane $1 billion figure we talked about earlier. But on the flip side, Bouvier's defense was crystal clear. He stated he was never an advisor. He was an independent seller taking on standard commercial risk. If he managed to secure massive profit margins, well, that was just good business, and his accuser was simply suffering from extreme buyer's remorse. Now, while the Rybolovlev dispute was actually settled confidentially back in 2023, the legal pressure in the art world definitely didn't stop there, which brings us to the upcoming 2026 criminal trial in Paris. Bouvier has been ordered to stand trial over the alleged unauthorized sale of over 60 Picasso pieces, which were sourced from Picasso's stepdaughter, Catherine Houghton-Blay. Investigators are pointing to major irregularities in ownership documentation and a highly disputed $8 million payment routed right through that same Nebilo Trust in Liechtenstein. The specific charges? Handling stolen goods and money laundering. Bouvier heavily denies these allegations across the board, stating he paid for the works completely legally. And it turns out the shadows cast by these totally opaque transactions reached the tax authorities as well. Fast forward to 2024, and a Swiss federal court ordered Bouvier to pay a staggering $821 million. That's about 730 million Swiss francs in unpaid taxes just for the years between 2008 and 2015. Despite Bouvier claiming he resided in Singapore during that time, the court officially ruled he actually spent most of his time right in Geneva. All right, let's transition over to our second dossier file, Case File 2, the corporate boardroom.
Because as you'll see, the shadows of Swiss corporate disputes extend far, far beyond just the glamorous fine art market. This brilliantly illustrates our next point. This is the official header from a 2026 Singapore High Court judgment. We aren't talking about Da Vinci anymore. This is high-stakes corporate warfare. It's between a Singaporean investment holding company called Vanbo and a Swiss company called FIA AG, along with its founder, Pedro Schmidt. Let's break down exactly what sparked this war. So, Vanbo invested 1.5 million Swiss francs into Plan AG to basically become the Asia-Pacific arm for a new stress-reducing beverage. But here is the absolute core of the dispute. Vanbo claims their huge investment was strictly contingent on maintaining a 12.5% share in the company. Yet, shortly after investing, they found out their actual share had been diluted down to 11.31% following a crowdfunding exercise. And just like in the art world, we have two starkly different narratives here. Vanbo, the plaintiff, alleged deliberate concealment of the share dilution, blatant fraudulent misrepresentation, and they even complained about being forced to use these specific components called VSCAP pushcaps. But let's look at the documented reality presented by the defense, Stanford AG and Pedro Schmidt. They showed that the signed term sheet explicitly warned that shares were subject to dilution. They showed the VSCAP pushcaps were actually contractually mandated for safety and patents. Basically, they argued the investor just ignored the documented business realities they originally agreed to. Believing they were victims of a complex fraudulent scheme, Vanbo executed a seriously dramatic legal maneuver. They managed to secure an ex parte pari worldwide Mariva injunction. This essentially froze all of the Swiss defendants' assets on a global scale. But this freeze was incredibly short-lived. In a pretty stunning reversal, the Singapore judge completely set it aside and thawed the assets almost immediately. So, the crucial point is, why did it fail? Unsealing the verdict reveals exactly why this massive injunction collapsed. It was basically a cascade of legal failures by the plaintiff. First off, Vanbo completely failed to show any real risk that the Swiss company was actually dissipating assets improperly. Second, and this is highly critical, the judge found material non-disclosure. That means Vanbo didn't give the court the full story during their initial one-sided hearing. Specifically, they hid the fact that they actually knew about the crowdfunding. And finally, the contracts clearly showed the dispute belonged in Swiss exclusive jurisdiction and ICC arbitration, definitely not in Singapore. The Singapore High Court summarized it perfectly when they stated, "The overarching test is whether there is objectively a real risk that a judgment may not be satisfied because of a risk of unjustified dealings with assets." To put that in perspective, to freeze someone's assets worldwide, you need rock-solid evidence of unjustified improper dealings. A standard business disagreement, or say a failure to read the fine print of a term sheet, that just isn't enough. You really have to be able to prove deliberate fraud over aggressive, standard business operations. Let's move to synthesize this and see how it builds. Because when you step back, the common threads linking both our case files are undeniably striking. Whether it's a billionaire buying a Picasso or an investment firm buying into a beverage company, the exact same patterns emerge. You have massive capital transfers. You have the heavy utilization of Swiss corporate veils, whether that's physical free ports or Swiss corporate law. And finally, you have these incredibly high-stakes clashes over the intent of the intermediaries. Was it all a calculated, fraudulent scheme to hide margins and dilute shares? Or was it simply the aggressive, documented reality of high-level commerce? Which brings us to our final lingering thought. We've traced the paper trails from the ultra-secure free ports of Geneva right to the courtrooms of Singapore and Paris. We've seen exactly how billions of dollars can shift on just the interpretation of a contract or the subtle wording of a negotiation. So when the ink finally dries, the offshore trusts are formed, and the assets are locked away completely out of sight, who truly controls the narrative in the shadows? Is it the buyer who didn't read the fine print, or the intermediary who wrote it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Always keep questioning what you see, and I'll catch you next time.